Evelyn Pierce stood on the sidewalk in the freezing November rain, her fingers wrapped around the last piece of bread she owned in the world, and wondered if she should eat it now or save it for morning. The question answered itself when she saw him. He sat against the brick wall of a closed bookstore, rain streaming down his face, his clothes soaked through. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, almost luminous in the dim glow of the street lamp. His hair, white as fresh snow, clung to his forehead and neck. He wasn't shivering despite the cold, but something about the way he sat there, perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, made her chest ache. Evelyn had been hungry before. She knew what it felt like to have nothing. She'd spent the last 3 months sleeping in her car after losing her apartment, working double shifts at the diner just to keep gas in the tank and occasionally afford a meal. Tonight she'd been let go. Budget cuts, her manager had said, not meeting her eyes. This bread was all she had left until she figured out what came next. But when she looked at the stranger, she saw someone who needed it more. She crossed the street, her sneakers splashing through puddles. The man didn't look up as she approached. His eyes were closed, his face tilted slightly upward, as if he were feeling the rain rather than trying to escape it. "Excuse me," Evelyn said softly. His eyes opened. They were the darkest crimson she had ever seen, like garnets held up to candlelight. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. Those eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced, as though he could read every thought, every fear, every desperate hope she carried. "You should not be out here alone," he said. His voice was low, accented in a way she couldn't place. Old world, elegant, completely at odds with his position on the ground. "Neither should you," she replied, and before she could second-guess herself, she held out the bread. "Here, you look like you need this." He stared at the offering, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of surprise that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That is your last piece," he said. "It wasn't a question." "How did you?" She stopped, shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Take it, please." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because you're cold and wet and sitting on the street in the rain. Because I know what it's like to have nothing. Because it's just bread, and maybe it'll help." He continued to study her, those crimson eyes searching. Then slowly he reached up and took the bread from her hand. His fingers brushed hers and they were ice cold, colder than the rain, colder than the November wind. "What is your name?" he asked. Evelyn Pierce." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and despite the wet clothes and the setting, he carried himself with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. He held the bread in one hand as if it were something precious. Then he did something that stopped her heart. He knelt before her, right there on the rain-soaked sidewalk, and bowed his head. "My name is Ishtar Feyorn," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavy. "And I am in your debt, Evelyn Pierce." "You don't have to," she started, but he raised his head, and the look in his eyes silenced her. "You have no idea what you have done," he said quietly. "But you will." Before she could respond, he stood again and the world seemed to tilt. Evelyn's vision blurred at the edges. She realized, distantly, that she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, that the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was finally running out. "Evelyn," Ishtar's voice came from very close now, and she felt his cold hands catch her as her knees buckled. "When did you last eat?" "I'm fine," she mumbled, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "You are not fine." There was something sharp in his tone now, almost angry. "You gave me your last piece of bread when you are starving yourself. You needed it more." "I do not need bread," he said, and there was something strange in the way he said it, something that would have made her ask questions if her head weren't spinning. "Where do you live?" "My car," she admitted. "It's parked a few blocks that way." She felt him go very still, then quietly, "You have no home, not at the moment." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become softer but somehow more commanding. "I cannot leave you like this. Will you trust me?" Evelyn knew she should say no. Every piece of common sense she possessed told her not to go anywhere with a stranger she'd met on the street. But when she looked up at his face, at those impossible crimson eyes, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she whispered. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. She should have protested, should have insisted she could walk, but the truth was she wasn't sure she could. The rain had stopped, she realized dimly, or perhaps they were moving too fast for it to touch them. The world blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady strength of his arms around her, and let herself drift. When she opened her eyes again, they were no longer on the street. They stood before a building that looked like it had been transplanted from another era. Gothic architecture, all stone and stained glass, hidden behind high walls in what appeared to be a private courtyard. Evelyn blinked, trying to orient herself. They were still in the city. She could hear the distant sounds of traffic, but this place felt removed, secret. "Where are we?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Ishtar replied. He carried her through the heavy wooden doors, and warmth enveloped them immediately. The interior was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings, dark wood paneling, tapestries that looked centuries old. Candelabras provided soft light, and a fire burned in a massive stone fireplace. "This is your home?" Evelyn asked, her voice small. "One of them." He set her down gently on a velvet sofa near the fire, then disappeared through a doorway. Evelyn sat there, taking in her surroundings, trying to make sense of what was happening. Everything about this felt like a dream. The man, the building, the way he moved. It was too surreal to be real. Ishtar returned carrying a tray with food. Real food. Bread, cheese, fruit, wine. He set it on the low table before her. "Eat," he said. It was a command, but spoken gently. "I can't take your food," Evelyn protested, even as her stomach cramped with hunger. "You gave me your last piece of bread. The least I can do is offer you a meal." He sat in the chair across from her, watching with those intense eyes. "Please, Evelyn, eat." She picked up a piece of bread and bit into it. It was soft and fresh, better than anything she'd tasted in months. Before she knew it, she was eating steadily, trying not to seem desperate even though she was. Ishtar sat silently, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When she'd taken the edge off her hunger, she looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because you helped me first," he said simply. "That's not an equal exchange. A piece of bread for all this." She gestured around them. "You do not understand what that bread meant." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I have lived a very long time, Evelyn. I have seen countless acts of cruelty, of selfishness, of people stepping over others to save themselves. But tonight, a woman with nothing gave her last piece of food to a stranger she believed had less than she did. That is not something I encounter often." "How long is a very long time?" Evelyn asked, picking up on the strange phrasing. He smiled, and for the first time she saw his teeth. They were white and perfect except for the canines, which were just slightly longer and sharper than they should have been. Her breath caught. She should have been afraid. Every instinct should have been screaming at her to run. But instead she felt oddly calm, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to see exactly that. "You're a vampire," she said. "Yes, and you were sitting in the rain on a street corner. Why?" "That is a longer story." He sat back, studying her. "You are not frightened." "Should I be?" "Most humans would be." Evelyn thought about that. She thought about the way he'd knelt before her, the reverence in his gesture, the way he'd caught her when she fell, the genuine concern in his voice, the way he was looking at her now, as if she were something rare and valuable. "You haven't hurt me," she said. "You've done the opposite. So no, I'm not frightened." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that made him look less otherworldly and more simply beautiful. "You are remarkable," he said softly. "I'm unemployed and homeless," Evelyn countered. "Remarkable is a stretch. You are kind in a world that rewards cruelty. You give when you have nothing to give. That is the very definition of remarkable." He stood, moving to the fireplace, gazing into the flames. "I was on that street because I needed to remember what it felt like to be powerless, to be cold and alone and overlooked. It is easy, when you have lived as long as I have and held the position I hold, to forget what true suffering looks like." "What position is that?" He turned back to face her, and in the firelight he looked like something out of a painting. Beautiful and terrible and ancient. "I am the king of the North American vampire court," he said. "And you, Evelyn Pierce, have shown me more genuine compassion than anyone has in centuries." Evelyn set down the wineglass she'd been holding, trying to process that information. King, he was a king, and she'd given him bread and told him he looked like he needed it. "I should probably apologize for, not recognizing you or treating you like royalty or something," she said. "No." His response was immediate and firm. "You treated me like a person who needed help. That is far more valuable than any royal courtesy." He moved back toward her, sitting on the edge of the sofa, closer than before. "I would like to offer you something. You've already given me food and shelter for the night. That's more than enough. I would like to offer you employment, and a place to stay for as long as you need it." Evelyn stared at him. "Why?" "Because you need both, and I find myself wanting to help you. Because I have resources beyond measure, and you gave me your last piece of bread. Because," he paused, as if considering his next words carefully. "Because I would like you to stay. You don't even know me. Then let me get to know you." His crimson eyes held hers. "What do you have to lose?" It was a fair question. She had no job, no home, no prospects. She was down to fumes in her gas tank and had been contemplating where to sleep tonight when she'd seen him. This beautiful, impossible man was offering her a lifeline, and she'd be a fool not to take it. "What kind of employment?" she asked cautiously. "Whatever you wish to do. I have libraries that need cataloging, archives that need organizing. I have correspondence that requires attention, events that need coordination. Or if you prefer, I can arrange a position elsewhere. The owner of the Belmont Hotel owes me a considerable favor." "The Belmont?" Evelyn repeated. "That was one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. And they owe you a favor?" "The owner is a vampire who serves in my court." He He would be happy to provide you with any position you desire and a reasonable salary. Evelyn turned to face him fully. Why are you doing this? Really? Ishtar was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out, and with one cold finger he traced a line down her cheek so gently it made her shiver. Because when I looked up and saw you standing there in the rain offering me kindness when you had every reason to hoard what little you possessed, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time, he said. Hope. You reminded me that goodness still exists. I do not want you to suffer when I have the power to prevent it. His touch lingered, and Evelyn found she didn't want him to pull away. There was something magnetic about him, something that went beyond his otherworldly beauty. She felt drawn to him in a way that should have terrified her but instead felt inevitable. Okay, she said. I'll stay, for now. The smile he gave her could have lit the entire room. Then let me show you to your quarters, he said, rising and offering her his hand. She took it, his cold fingers wrapping around hers, and let him lead her deeper into what was apparently a vampire king's hidden palace. The room he brought her to was more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever slept. A massive 4-poster bed with silk sheets, a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub, windows that overlooked a garden she hadn't realized existed in the courtyard. There were clothes in the wardrobe, all in her size, which should have been impossible but somehow didn't surprise her. How did you? She started. I have people who are very efficient, Ishtar said from the doorway. Rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow we will discuss details. Tonight you are safe and warm and fed, that is enough. He moved to leave but Evelyn found herself calling out. Ishtar? He turned back and even in the dim light his eyes seemed to glow. Thank you, she said. No, he replied softly. Thank you. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and Evelyn was alone in a room that belonged in a palace. Trying to make sense of a night that had turned her entire life upside down, she bathed, marveling at the hot water and expensive soaps. She dressed in a silk nightgown that felt like water against her skin. She climbed into the bed, which was softer than any surface she'd ever touched, and as she drifted toward sleep, warm and comfortable for the first time in months, she thought about crimson eyes and cold hands and a vampire king who had knelt before her in the rain. She woke to soft morning light filtering through gauzy curtains. For a moment she forgot where she was, then the previous night came rushing back. She sat up, half expecting to find herself in her car, the whole thing a fever dream brought on by hunger and cold. But no, she was in the palace, or castle, or whatever this place was. There was a knock on the door, light and courteous. Come in, Evelyn called, pulling the sheets up self-consciously. The door opened to reveal a woman with the same pale skin and white hair as Ishtar, though her eyes were silver rather than red. She carried a tray with tea and pastries. Good morning, the woman said, her voice musical. I am Seraphine. Lord Feyorn asked me to ensure you had everything you needed. Lord Feyorn? Evelyn repeated, his formal title, though he prefers simply Ishtar among friends. Seraphine set the tray on a side table. He is currently attending to court matters, but asked that you join him for lunch, if you are willing. Court matters, Evelyn echoed, still trying to adjust to this new reality. Right, because he's a king. Seraphine smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. He is indeed one of the finest rulers our kind has known. He is fair and just, protective of those under his care. She moved to the wardrobe, pulling out clothes. These should suit you. If they do not, I can have others brought. The outfit was casual but elegant. Dark jeans, a soft sweater the color of wine, boots that looked comfortable but expensive. Everything fit perfectly. How did he know my size? Evelyn asked, even though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Lord Feyorn is very observant. He notices details others miss. Evelyn dressed, drank the tea, ate the pastries that were still warm from an oven somewhere in this impossible building. Seraphine stayed, chatting easily about mundane things, never making Evelyn feel uncomfortable or out of place. When she was ready, Seraphine led her through a maze of corridors, each more beautiful than the last. They emerged into a dining room that took Evelyn's breath away. The walls were lined with windows that somehow showed a garden in full bloom despite it being November. A long table dominated the space, but only 2 places were set, close together at one end. Ishtar stood when she entered. He was dressed differently than the night before, in clothes that looked both modern and timeless. Black pants, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing pale, muscular forearms. His white hair was pulled back, and those crimson eyes tracked her movement across the room. Evelyn, he said, and her name in his voice sounded like music. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months, she admitted. Your home is beautiful. I am glad you think so. He pulled out a chair for her and she sat, hyper-aware of how close he was. I wanted to discuss your options. Over lunch, which was far more food than she could possibly eat, Ishtar laid out several possibilities. She could work at the Belmont in whatever capacity she wished. She could work here, helping manage his extensive libraries and archives. She could even pursue education if she wanted. He would fund it, no questions asked. Why would you pay for my education? Evelyn asked, setting down her fork. Because you are intelligent and capable, and you deserve the opportunity to pursue your interests, Ishtar replied. Because I can, and there is no reason not to. You barely know me, I know enough. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unnerving intensity. I know you are kind, I know you are selfless, I know you are brave enough to approach a stranger in the dark and offer help. Those qualities are rare, Evelyn. I value them highly. And if I said I wanted to work here, in your archives? Something flickered in his expression, something warm and pleased. Then I would be honored to have you close. The way he said close made her pulse quicken. What would that involve? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The archives are extensive. Records dating back centuries from across the Americas and beyond. They need to be properly organized and preserved. It would be detailed work, requiring patience and care. I think you would excel at it. He paused. It would also mean you would be living here. There are quarters for staff, though you may keep the room you are in now if you prefer. I'd be living in a vampire court, Evelyn said slowly. Yes, does that trouble you? She thought about it. She should be terrified. She was human, and this was the domain of predators. But when she looked at Ishtar, all she felt was safe. No, she said, it doesn't trouble me. His smile was radiant. Then it is settled. You will begin whenever you are ready. There is no rush. I'm ready now, Evelyn said. I'd like to feel useful. You are far more than useful, Evelyn Pierce. But if you wish to start today, I will show you the archives myself. He led her through more corridors, down a spiral staircase that seemed to descend forever, until they reached a massive wooden door carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Ishtar placed his hand flat against the wood, and she heard the distinct click of a lock disengaging. The archives were vast. Shelves upon shelves of books, documents, scrolls, all illuminated by soft lights that seemed to have no source. The air smelled of old paper and leather and something else, something almost magical. This is centuries of our history, Ishtar said, his voice filled with reverence. Wars and treaties, births and deaths, laws and legends. It is the memory of my people, and it is precious to me. Evelyn walked slowly between the shelves, trailing her fingers along the spines of books. She could feel the weight of history here, the importance of it. I've never seen anything like this, she whispered. Few have. I am trusting you with something very important, Evelyn. She turned to look at him. Why? You've known me for less than 24 hours. He crossed the space between them, moving with that supernatural grace. When he stood before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of deeper red in his eyes, he spoke quietly. Because last night, when you had every reason to think only of yourself, you thought of someone else. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his cold fingers lingering. I have spent centuries learning to read people, Evelyn. You are genuine in a way that is vanishingly rare. I trust you because you have proven yourself trustworthy. His touch sent shivers down her spine. She found herself leaning into it, drawn to him in a way that defied logic. I won't let you down, she said. I know you will not. They stood there for a moment, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin, see the way his eyes darkened as he looked at her. Then he stepped back, breaking the moment, and began showing her the organizational system. The days that followed took on a rhythm. Evelyn would wake, eat breakfast brought by Seraphine or another member of the household staff, then descend to the archives. Ishtar would often join her, working in companionable silence or answering her questions about the history she was sorting through. They would have lunch together, and he would tell her stories about the world as it had been decades or centuries ago. In the evenings, she was free to explore the grounds, read in the library, or simply rest in her room. It should have felt strange, living among vampires. But the staff treated her with respect and kindness. No one made her feel like prey. Ishtar had made it abundantly clear that she was under his protection, and apparently that meant something significant in their world. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. The graceful way he moved, the quiet authority he carried, the gentleness he showed her despite his obvious power. And sometimes she would catch him watching her in return, his expression unreadable. 2 weeks after her arrival, everything changed. She was working late in the archives, absorbed in a particularly fascinating account of a treaty negotiation from the 1700s, when she heard voices from the corridor above. Raised voices, which was unusual. The household was typically quiet. You cannot simply bring a human into the court without consulting the council, a male voice said, sharp with irritation. I can do as I please, Ishtar replied, his voice cold in a way Evelyn had never heard. I am the king, and the king has responsibilities. This human, this Evelyn Pierce, she is a security risk. She has access to our archives, to our history. What if she shares it with the outside world? She will not. You cannot know that. You have known her mere weeks. I know her character. That is sufficient. It is not sufficient. The other voice was rising now. The council demands an audience with her. We must assess whether she poses a threat. There was a long silence. Then Ishtar spoke, and his voice was deadly quiet. If any member of this court so much as speaks to her in a discourteous manner, I will consider it a personal offense. She is under my protection. That protection is absolute. Is that understood, Counselor Theron? The council will not be pleased, my lord. The council does not rule here. I do. You are dismissed. Evelyn heard footsteps retreating, then silence. She sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. Security risk, threat assessment. She'd been so caught up in the magic of this place, in the quiet joy of useful work in Ishtar's company, that she'd forgotten there might be consequences to her presence here. She heard footsteps descending the spiral staircase, and a moment later Ishtar appeared. His expression was stormy, but when he saw her face it softened. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm causing problems for you, Evelyn said quietly. Maybe I should go. No. The word came out sharp and immediate. He crossed to her in quick strides. You are not going anywhere. But the council serves me, not the other way around. They are concerned about tradition and security, as is their role. But I make the final decisions, and I have decided that you belong here. I'm human, Ishtar. I don't belong in a vampire court. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his cold ones, and the gesture reminded her of that first night when he'd knelt on the rain-soaked sidewalk. You belong wherever you choose to be, he said intently, and I hope you choose to stay here with me. The way he said it, the raw honesty in his voice, made her breath catch. Why, she whispered, why does it matter so much to you? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. Because in all my centuries of existence, I have never met anyone who made me feel the way you do. Because when you are near, the world seems brighter. Because you look at me and see not a king or a monster, but simply Ishtar. Because I find myself thinking of you constantly, hoping you are happy, wanting to see you smile. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Because I am falling in love with you, Evelyn Pierce, and I do not want you to go. The world seemed to stop. Evelyn stared at him, at this impossibly beautiful, impossibly powerful being kneeling before her, offering his heart. You barely know me, she said, but the words came out weak. I know you saved me, he replied, not from any physical danger, but from the emptiness I had been drowning in for decades. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. You showed me kindness when you had nothing to gain. You trusted me when you had every reason to fear. I know enough, Evelyn. I know my own heart, and it wants you. She should be cautious. She should think this through. But when she looked at him, all she could feel was the truth of her own heart, which had been falling for him since the moment he'd caught her when she'd fallen, since he'd insisted on feeding her, since he'd offered her safety and trust and a place to belong. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. Which is crazy, because you're a vampire king and I'm nobody. You are not nobody, Ishtar interrupted fiercely. Do not ever say that. You are brave and kind and remarkable, and she kissed him. It was impulsive and probably foolish, but she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words. For a moment he went still, surprised. Then his hands came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her want to cry. His lips were cold but soft, and he kissed her like she was something precious and fragile. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I will protect you from anything, he murmured. The council, other vampires, the whole world if necessary. You are mine to keep safe, yours? She asked, a smile tugging at her lips. If you will have me, if you can accept what I am. I already have, Evelyn said. She ran her fingers through his white hair, marveling at the softness of it. You're Ishtar, the man who knelt before me in the rain, the man who gave me shelter when I had none, the man who trusts me with his history and tells me stories and looks at me like I'm the most important person in the world. That's who you are to me. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, wrapping herself around him despite the cold of his body. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the archives, surrounded by centuries of history, writing their own new chapter. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, Seraphine came to Evelyn's room in the early evening, her usually calm face tight with worry. The council has requested your presence, she said. Lord Feyorn tried to refuse them, but they invoked ancient law. They have the right to meet anyone living within the court. Evelyn's stomach dropped. When? Now. I am to escort you to the council chamber. Seraphine hesitated. Lord Feyorn will be there. He will not let them harm you. But they can make things difficult for him, can't they? Evelyn asked, understanding dawning. If he defies them openly, it creates problems. Seraphine nodded reluctantly. The council is advisory, but they represent the old families, the powerful bloodlines. Their support is important even for a king. Then I'll meet with them. I have nothing to hide. Seraphine led her through parts of the palace she hadn't seen before, down into what felt like the heart of the building. The council chamber was circular, with high ceilings and walls carved with intricate designs. 7 chairs were arranged in a semicircle, 6 of them occupied by vampires who all had that same pale, regal beauty as Ishtar. At the center, on a throne that was clearly meant to dominate the room, sat Ishtar himself. He looked every inch the king now, his bearing commanding, his expression neutral. But when his eyes found Evelyn, they warmed. "Evelyn Pierce," said the vampire directly across from Ishtar. He was older looking than the others, his white hair longer, his crimson eyes sharp. "This must be Theron. We have asked you here to better understand your presence in this court." "I work in the archives," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. "Lord Feyorn offered me employment and housing and his personal protection. These are not things the king typically offers to humans." Theron's voice was cold. "What hold do you have over him, counselor?" Ishtar's voice cracked like a whip. "You will speak to her with respect." "I am merely asking questions, my lord, questions we all wish answered." Theron turned back to Evelyn. "You understand that our history, our secrets are precious. You, a human, have access to them. How do we know you will not share what you learn?" "Because I gave my word," Evelyn replied, "and because I respect the trust Lord Feyorn has placed in me. Words are easy. Promises are broken, not mine," Evelyn said firmly. "When I commit to something, I see it through." Another counselor, a woman with silver eyes, leaned forward. "What is your relationship with the king?" Evelyn glanced at Ishtar. He met her gaze and she saw the slight nod, the permission to speak truth. "I care about him deeply," she said, "and I believe he cares for me." "Cares for you," Theron repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "The king does not form attachments to humans. It is beneath his station." Ishtar stood and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Counselor Theron, you overstep, do I, my lord? Or am I speaking truth that you do not wish to hear? She is human. She will age and die in the blink of an eye. What future can there possibly be? That is not your concern. It is when the king's judgment is clouded by infatuation. She is a distraction, a potential liability. The kindest thing would be to send her away, provide her with funds to start a life elsewhere, and let this foolishness end before it causes real damage." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. The worst part was that Theron wasn't entirely wrong. She was human. She would age. Ishtar would stay exactly as he was for centuries, and she would wither and die. How could there be a future in that? "No." Ishtar's voice was absolute. "I will not send her away. I will not entertain further discussion on this matter. Evelyn stays by my command and by my desire. If that troubles any of you, you may resign your position on this council." The silence that followed was heavy. Then the woman with silver eyes spoke. "My lord, we are not your enemies. We seek only to protect you in this court. But Theron is right that there are complications with a human companion. Have you considered turning her?" Evelyn's breath caught. "Turning her, making her a vampire." "I have considered it," Ishtar said quietly. "And I have decided that the choice must be hers alone. I will not force that upon her." "Then ask her to choose now," Theron said. "Let us have clarity. If she wishes to remain in this court, in your life, she must commit. She must become one of us." "Absolutely not," Ishtar growled. "She has been here mere weeks. That decision requires time and understanding. I will not have her pressured." "My lord, with respect, you are allowing your feelings to override logic. This situation cannot continue indefinitely. Either she becomes vampire or she leaves. There is no middle ground." Evelyn found her voice. "May I speak?" All eyes turned to her. Ishtar looked tense, as if expecting her to bolt. "I understand your concerns," she said, addressing the council. "You don't know me, you don't trust me. That's fair. I'm an outsider, and I have access to your history and your secrets. If I were in your position, I'd be worried too." She took a breath. "But I'm not going to betray Lord Feyorn's trust. I'm not going to share what I learn, not because I'm afraid of consequences, but because it would hurt him, and I won't do that." "Pretty words," Theron said. "But insufficient." "Then what would be sufficient?" Evelyn asked. "What would make you trust me?" "Becoming one of us. Proving your commitment. By giving up my humanity." Evelyn looked at Ishtar. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the arms of his throne. "Is that what you want? For me to become a vampire?" "I want you to be happy," he said, his voice strained. "Whatever that means, I will not force this choice." "But it would solve the problem, wouldn't it?" She turned back to the council. "If I became a vampire, you would accept me." The silver-eyed woman nodded slowly. "It would show commitment, and it would mean you shared our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities. You would be truly one of us." Evelyn thought about it. Becoming immortal, powerful, inhuman. Never aging, never dying. Spending centuries with Ishtar, learning and exploring and existing in this strange, beautiful world he'd shown her. It sounded like a fantasy. It also sounded terrifying. "I need time," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make right now in this room, under pressure. If you need an answer, I need time to think about what it would mean." "Time is what we do not have," Theron began, but the silver-eyed woman cut him off. "A week," she said. "Give her a week to consider. Then we reconvene and she provides her answer." Ishtar looked like he wanted to argue, but Evelyn caught his eye and shook her head slightly. This was a compromise. It gave her space to think and gave the council something they could accept. 1 week, Ishtar said, and during that week Evelyn is not to be pressured or approached about this matter by anyone. Is that clear? The council agreed, though Theron looked deeply unsatisfied. Evelyn was dismissed and she left the chamber with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She made it back to her room before the tears started. She wasn't even sure why she was crying, fear maybe, overwhelm. The weight of impossible choices. There was a knock on her door, and then Ishtar was there, pulling her into his arms. I am sorry, he murmured into her hair. I am so sorry, I should have protected you from this. You did everything you could, Evelyn said, her voice muffled against his chest. They're right, Ishtar. I can't stay here as a human forever. Eventually something has to give. You do not have to become a vampire for me, but you want me to stay. Yes, more than I can express. She pulled back enough to look at him. What would it be like if I chose to turn? He led her to sit on the bed, keeping her hand in his. It would be painful. The transformation is not easy. You would sleep for 3 days while your body changed. When you woke, you would be stronger, faster. Your senses would be heightened. You would need blood to survive. Would I lose myself, my humanity? No, you would still be Evelyn. Your personality, your memories, your soul, all of it remains. You simply become more, and I'd live forever. Yes, with me if you wished it. She studied his face, this beautiful, impossible man who had become the center of her world in such a short time. Are there downsides besides the obvious? He was quiet for a moment. Sunlight becomes painful. Not immediately deadly as myths suggest, but uncomfortable enough to avoid. You will need blood regularly, though we have ethical sources. You will outlive any mortal connections you still have. And you will be vampire with all the politics and complications that entails. But I'd be with you, yes, for as long as you wished. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the cold solidity of him. I love you, she said. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. And the thought of leaving, of never seeing you again, it hurts. His arms tightened around her. I love you too, more than I thought myself capable of loving. You have become essential to me, Evelyn. Then I have my answer, she said quietly. I don't need a week. He went very still. What are you saying? She pulled back to look at him directly. I'm saying yes, I want to become a vampire. I want to stay with you. Evelyn, you must be certain. This is irreversible. Certain. And she was. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Love. Hope. The desire for a future she'd never imagined possible. What do I have waiting for me in the mortal world? No family, no real prospects. But here with you, I have purpose. I have someone who sees me, values me, loves me. I'd be a fool to walk away from that. You would not be a fool. You would be protecting yourself. I don't need protecting from you, Evelyn said firmly. I need you in my life, so yes. Turn me, make me vampire, let me stay with you. The look on his face was pure relief and joy and love so intense it took her breath away. He cupped her face in his cold hands and kissed her deeply. I will make certain you never regret this, he promised against her lips. I will spend eternity making you happy. I'm going to hold you to that, she said, smiling through the tears that had started again, happy ones this time. They told the council the next day. Theron looked satisfied, the silver-eyed woman approving. Preparations were made. Ishtar explained that he would be the one to turn her, as was his right as king and as the one she'd chosen. The process would take place in his private chambers, with Seraphine on hand to help once the initial transformation began. Evelyn spent the 2 days before her turning saying goodbye to her human life. She called the few acquaintances she had, told them she'd found a position abroad and wouldn't be reachable for a while. She packed up the belongings from her car, which Ishtar had retrieved for her. She wrote letters to no one in particular, trying to capture what it felt like to stand on the edge of such a monumental change. And she spent time with Ishtar, talking about the future, about what her new life would look like. He told her about the vampire world, the courts and laws and customs. He promised to teach her everything she needed to know. He held her when the fear threatened to overwhelm her, and he listened when she needed to talk through her worries. The night of the turning, Evelyn wore white. It felt appropriate somehow, like she was attending her own funeral and wedding simultaneously. Ishtar met her in his chambers, which she'd never seen before. They were dark and elegant, all deep colors and rich fabrics, with a massive bed at the center. Are you ready? He asked, softly. Yes, Evelyn said, and meant it. He pulled her close, kissing her gently. This will hurt. I wish I could spare you that, but I cannot. The venom must work through your entire system. But I will be here when you wake. I will not leave your side. I trust you, she said simply. He led her to the bed and she lay down, her heart hammering. Ishtar knelt beside her, brushing her hair away from her neck. His fingers were gentle, reverent. I love you, he murmured. Remember that. When it hurts, remember that this is born of love. Then he bent his head, and she felt his teeth pierce her skin. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Fire in her veins, burning from the inside out. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her body arched, every muscle seizing. Through the agony she felt Ishtar's arms around her, heard his voice speaking words she couldn't process. Then darkness took her, and she knew nothing at all. She woke 3 days later to a world that was completely different. Colors were more vivid, sounds sharper. She could hear conversations happening floors away, could smell things she'd never noticed before. And the hunger there was a deep, aching hunger that demanded attention. Evelyn. Ishtar's voice right beside her. She turned her head and saw him with a clarity that was startling. Every detail of his face was crisp and perfect. How do you feel? Hungry, she admitted, her voice coming out different, richer. And everything is so much. The sounds, the smells, that will settle. You will learn to control it. He helped her sit up, and she realized she felt strong, stronger than she ever had in her human life. You need to feed. He'd prepared for this. Had blood waiting in a crystal glass. Evelyn had worried she'd be revolted, but when she brought it to her lips, all she felt was the desperate need to satisfy the hunger. The blood tasted better than anything she'd ever consumed. She drank deeply, and the aching emptiness began to fade. When the glass was empty, she looked at Ishtar. He was watching her with careful attention, clearly gauging her reaction. I'm okay, she said. I think I'm okay. You are more than okay. You are magnificent. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his neck, breathing in his scent, which was now so much more complex than it had been before. Thank you, she whispered, for this, for all of it. You gave me far more than I gave you, he replied. You gave me hope and love and a reason to feel alive again after centuries of emptiness. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other. Then Ishtar began teaching her about her new abilities, her new life. She learned to move with the supernatural speed and grace that came with being vampire. She learned to manage the heightened senses, to filter out what wasn't important. She learned the rules and customs of the vampire world, and Ishtar was patient, never pushing her, always letting her move at her own pace. The council accepted her fully once she'd turned. Even Theron seemed satisfied, though he remained distant. The silver-eyed woman, whose name was Lucienne, became something like a mentor, teaching Evelyn about court politics and how to navigate the complex social structures. But the best part was the nights with Ishtar. They would walk through the gardens together, talking for hours. They would work side by side in the archives, and he would tell her the stories behind the documents. They would lie together in his chambers, and he would trace patterns on her skin and tell her how much he loved her. 6 months after her turning, Ishtar called together the entire court for an announcement. Evelyn stood beside him, nervous despite herself. She'd come so far, but being the center of attention among hundreds of vampires was still daunting. I have served as king of this court for over 2 centuries, Ishtar said, his voice carrying through the great hall. In that time I have never taken a consort. I have never found anyone worthy of standing beside me. That has changed. He turned to Evelyn, taking her hand. Evelyn Pierce gave me bread when she had nothing. She showed me kindness when she had every reason to protect herself. She trusted me when I was a stranger, and she has proven herself brave, intelligent, and compassionate every day since. She is my equal in every way that matters, and so I ask before this court that she accept the position of queen. The hall erupted in whispers, but Evelyn barely heard them. She was focused entirely on Ishtar, on the love and certainty in his eyes. Yes, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I'll stand with you. The whispers turned to applause, and even Theron was clapping, though he looked like it pained him slightly. Ishtar pulled her close and kissed her in front of the entire court, a claiming and a promise all at once. The coronation was a grand affair. Evelyn wore a gown the color of midnight, with diamonds that caught the light like stars. A crown was placed on her head, cold and heavy and perfect, and when Ishtar took her hand and led her to the twin thrones at the front of the hall, she realized she'd never felt more at home. Years passed, then decades. Evelyn and Ishtar ruled the North American court together, fair and just. They traveled the world, visiting other vampire territories, forging alliances. They spent countless nights in the archives, adding to the history they both loved. And through it all, they loved each other with a depth that never faded. One night, standing in the garden where white roses bloomed under the moonlight, Ishtar pulled Evelyn close. Do you regret it? He asked softly. Giving up your humanity. Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been, homeless and hungry, handing bread to a stranger. She thought about everything that choice had led to. A home, a purpose, a love that transcended time itself. Not for a single moment, she said. You are my home, Ishtar. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. When I knelt before you in the rain, I knew you were special, he murmured. But I could not have imagined you would become my entire world. Good thing I decided to share my bread then, Evelyn said with a smile. The best decision either of us ever made. They stood together in the garden, 2 immortals bound by love, and looked toward a future that stretched endlessly before them. Whatever came, they would face it together. king and queen, partners, soulmates. And it had all begun with a piece of bread and a cold stranger in the rain. 50 years after her turning, Evelyn stood before the council once more. This time she stood beside Ishtar as an equal, wearing her crown. The council had been debating an issue regarding territorial rights, and tensions were high. Theron was arguing his point forcefully. The Western court is encroaching on settlements that have been ours for over a century. We must respond with strength. Strength does not always mean violence, Evelyn interjected. Have we attempted diplomacy? Have we offered to meet with their king and discuss boundaries? Theron's expression soured. With respect, my queen, you do not understand the history between our courts. Then explain it to me, Evelyn said calmly. I am always willing to learn. Ishtar watched the exchange with pride. Evelyn had grown into her role beautifully. She was diplomatic but firm, compassionate but not weak. The court had come to respect her, even Theron, though he'd never quite warmed to her. The Western court believes strength is the only language worth speaking, Theron said. They will see diplomacy as weakness. Or they will see it as confidence, Evelyn countered. Only the truly strong can offer peace without fear. If they reject our attempt at diplomacy, then we consider other options. But we try peace first. Lucienne nodded in agreement. The queen speaks wisdom. We lose nothing by attempting negotiation. The council debated further but ultimately voted in favor of Evelyn's approach. When the meeting concluded, Ishtar caught her hand as they left the chamber. You handled that beautifully, he said. I had a good teacher, Evelyn replied, squeezing his hand. You've taught me so much. We have taught each other. You have made me a better king, Evelyn. Your compassion balances my sometimes cold logic. Together we are stronger than I ever was alone. They returned to their private chambers and Ishtar pulled her into his arms, swaying slowly as if to music only they could hear. I love you, he murmured, more with each passing year. I love you too, Evelyn said. Thank you for kneeling that night, for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for offering me bread when you had every reason to keep it for yourself. You saved me, Evelyn, in every way that matters. They stood together in the quiet of their rooms, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life in eternity together. One evening, Evelyn discovered something unexpected in the archives. Tucked in a volume of old treaties was a prophecy, written in a language she'd been studying for years. Ishtar, she called, and he appeared instantly, always attuned to her voice. Look at this. She showed him the passage. It spoke of a human with a generous heart who would bring hope to a king who had lost his way. The king would kneel before her, and she would rise to stand beside him, bringing a new era of peace and prosperity to his court. Ishtar read it silently, then looked at Evelyn with wonder. This was written 300 years ago. I know, Evelyn whispered. Do you think? I think we were meant to find each other, Ishtar said. I think fate put you on that street corner, and some deep part of me recognized you even then. It is why I knelt, not just out of respect for your kindness, but because something in me knew you were my future. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, and she blinked them away, still not entirely used to the fact that vampires could cry. All this time I thought it was chance, luck, but maybe it was always meant to be. Chance or fate, it does not matter, Ishtar said, pulling her close. What matters is that we found each other, that you chose me, and I chose you, and we built this life together. Evelyn tucked the prophecy carefully back into the volume. Some things were meant to be discovered but not necessarily shared. This could be their secret, a confirmation that what they had was written in the stars long before either of them existed. Time continued its eternal march. Evelyn and Ishtar witnessed the world change around them. Technology advanced, cities grew, but their love remained constant. They made new traditions. Every year on the anniversary of the night they met, they would return to that street corner where it had all begun. Sometimes they would leave bread there, a gift for anyone who might need it. Sometimes they would simply stand together, remembering. The court flourished under their joint rule. Their approach, balancing strength with compassion, became a model that other courts began to emulate. Young vampires would come to study with them, learning not just power but responsibility, not just survival but purpose. Evelyn never forgot where she came from. She established shelters for the homeless, funded discreetly through vampire resources. She created job programs and educational opportunities. And always she remembered the girl she'd been, standing in the rain with her last piece of bread, and she made sure no one in her territory had to make the choice she'd made that night. Ishtar watched her work with endless pride. She had not just become his queen. She had become a force for good in a world that often lacked it, and every night, when they retired to their chambers, he thanked whatever power had put her on that street corner at exactly the right moment. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their chambers looking out over the city, Evelyn leaned against Ishtar's side. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd kept the bread, she asked. If I'd walked past you? Every day, Ishtar admitted. And every day I am grateful you did not. You changed the entire trajectory of my existence, Evelyn. Before you, I was going through the motions. After you, I was truly alive again. I was so hungry that night, Evelyn said softly. Part of me wanted to keep it, but when I saw you sitting there, looking so alone, I couldn't. It felt wrong to walk past. Your compassion is what makes you extraordinary. It is why I fell in love with you. It is why you are an exceptional queen. Never lose that part of yourself. No matter how many years pass. As long as I have you, I won't, Evelyn promised. You keep me grounded. You remind me what's important. They stood together in the darkness, immortal and in love, looking toward a future that held infinite possibility. Below them, the city pulsed with life. Somewhere out there, someone might be cold and alone, and Evelyn made a mental note to increase funding to the shelters. If she could spare even one person the desperation she'd felt that night, it would be worth it. Ishtar's arms tightened around her, and she felt the press of his lips against her hair. This was home, not the palace, not the court, but this Ishtar's embrace, his love, their partnership. Everything else was just backdrop to the central truth of their existence. They loved each other, they had built something beautiful together, and they would continue to build it. Night after night, year after year, century after century. All because a girl with nothing had chosen to give everything to a stranger in the rain. And because that stranger had recognized the gift for what it truly was, not just bread, but hope. Not just kindness, but love waiting to bloom. The story could have ended there, but their life together continued on, rich and full. They faced challenges, territorial disputes, internal court politics, the occasional vampire who challenged Ishtar's rule. But they faced everything together, united. Evelyn became known throughout the vampire world not just as Ishtar's queen, but as a leader in her own right. Other courts sought her counsel. She mediated disputes, negotiated treaties, and became a voice for progressive change in a society that often clung to ancient traditions. And through it all, Ishtar was her constant, her partner, her love, her home. He supported her initiatives, stood beside her in conflicts, and loved her with a devotion that never wavered. They did not have children. Vampires could not reproduce in the traditional sense, but they mentored countless young vampires, shaping the next generation of their kind. They were parents in every way that mattered, guiding and protecting those who looked to them for leadership. One night, 200 years after that fateful meeting, Evelyn and Ishtar hosted a grand celebration. It was the bicentennial of their meeting, and the entire court gathered to honor them. Speeches were made, toasts offered. Even Theron, ancient now and finally mellowed by time, stood and spoke. "I did not trust you at first," he said, looking at Evelyn. "I thought you were a distraction, a mistake. I have never been more wrong. You have made our king happy. You have made our court strong. You have proven that sometimes the best rulers are those who remember what it means to have nothing, and who use their power to ensure others never have to suffer as they once did. You have my respect, Queen Evelyn, and my loyalty." Evelyn stood and bowed to Theron, a gesture of mutual respect that would have been unthinkable when she'd first arrived. The hall erupted in applause, and when she sat back down, Ishtar took her hand. "I am so proud of you," he whispered. "You have exceeded every hope I had when I first met you." "We did this together," Evelyn replied, "every step of the way." Later, when the celebration had wound down and they were alone, Ishtar led Evelyn to a room she'd never seen. He opened the door to reveal a portrait one he'd commissioned secretly. It showed the two of them as they'd been that first night. Ishtar sitting against the wall, Evelyn standing before him offering bread, rain falling around them. Below the portrait was an inscription. She gave everything when she had nothing. He knelt before her and rose never to fall again. Evelyn stared at it, tears streaming down her face. "Ishtar, it's beautiful. It is the moment that changed my existence," he said. "I wanted it captured forever, so no matter how many centuries pass, we will always remember." She turned to him, pulling him close. "I would never forget. That moment is burned into my soul, as it is in mine." He kissed her deeply, pouring 2 centuries of love into it. "Thank you, Evelyn, for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me." "Thank you for kneeling," she replied. "For showing me that strength and humility can coexist, for building this life with me." They stood before the portrait, remembering, and then they returned to their chambers, to their life, to their love that would endure for eternity. Because some love stories do not end. Some love stories are just beginning, even after centuries. Some loves are meant to last forever, built on foundations of kindness and trust and genuine connection. Evelyn had given her last piece of bread to a cold stranger in the rain. He had been the vampire king, and he had knelt before her, recognizing her worth before she even knew his identity. From that single act of compassion, an empire of love had been built, and it would stand, unshakable and eternal, for as long as they both existed, which was forever. In the quiet moments, late at night when the court slept and the city hummed below, Evelyn and Ishtar would lie together in their bed and talk about everything and nothing. They would remember the past, plan for the future, and exist fully in the present. "Do you ever miss being human?" Ishtar asked one such night. Evelyn considered the question carefully. Sometimes I miss the simplicity. The way time felt more precious because there was less of it. But no, I don't regret the choice. I gained so much more than I lost. You lost the sun, Ishtar pointed out gently. I know you loved watching sunrises. I love watching you more, Evelyn said simply. And we have our gardens that bloom at night. We have moonlight and starlight and each other. That's more than enough. Ishtar pulled her closer, marveling as he always did that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. I will spend eternity trying to be worthy of you. You already are. You were worthy the moment you knelt on that sidewalk. She kissed him softly. You showed me more respect in that moment than anyone had shown me in years. You treated me like I mattered when I felt invisible. You were never invisible, Evelyn. You shone like a beacon. I was just fortunate enough to be looking in the right direction. They fell into comfortable silence, wrapped in each other's arms. Outside, the world turned. Inside, they were at peace. Their story had no neat ending because it had no ending at all. It simply continued, day after night after century after millennium, an eternal love story born from a single act of kindness. Evelyn Pierce had handed her last piece of bread to a cold stranger. He had been the vampire king, and he had knelt before her in recognition of her beautiful soul. She had become his queen, his partner, his eternal love. Together, they ruled with wisdom and compassion, never forgetting the moment that had brought them together. And every year, on that anniversary, they returned to the street where it all began. Sometimes they would find someone in need and offer help. Sometimes the street was empty and they would simply stand together, remembering. But always, always, Evelyn would think about the girl she'd been, clutching that bread and deciding to give it away. And she would be grateful for that choice, that moment of kindness that had changed everything. Because it had given her Ishtar. It had given her love. It had given her a home and a purpose and a future beyond anything she'd ever imagined. One small act of compassion had rippled out into eternity, creating something beautiful and lasting and true. And that, perhaps, was the real magic. Not vampires or immortality or power, but the simple truth that kindness matters. That choosing to see another person suffering and respond with generosity, even at cost to yourself, can change the world. Evelyn had changed Ishtar's world, and he had changed hers. Together they had built something extraordinary. And they would continue to build it, night after night, for as long as the stars burned in the sky above them, forever and always, together.